On the 13th of June 1993, the Smith family moved into a quiet town of Warren, Ohio. They were a family of 4, parents and 2 children, Maggie a teenager, and a child named Sarah. They were excited about their new home. The house was an old Victorian-style mansion, with a large garden and a spacious attic. But as soon as they moved in, they noticed something strange. There was an eerie feeling coming from the attic, as if something was watching them. The family tried to ignore the strange feeling, but it was always there, lurking in the back of their minds. The neighbors seemed to avoid them, and other children would run in fear when they passed by their house. Despite the strange occurrences, the Smith family tried to make the best of their new home. They decorated it with their belongings, painted the walls, and made it their own. But the strange feeling in the attic only grew stronger. Every time they went up there, they felt like they were being watched, and strange noises would come from the walls. One day, the child, Sarah, came running down from the attic, screaming about a monster in the mirror. Her parents thought it was just her imagination, but the feeling of unease grew stronger. As time passed, strange things began to happen. They would find things misplaced, and strange creaking sounds were heard coming from the attic. The family felt like they were being haunted, but they could not explain what was happening. The neighbors continued to avoid them, and passing children continued to run in fear. It was as if the whole town knew something the Smith family did not. One night, as they were sleeping, the family was awakened by a loud crashing sound from the attic. They rushed up to see what was happening, and they found an old mirror broken into pieces. They shut the attic close and barred the door leading to it. For a long time the mirror had always been in the attic, collecting dust. It was oval-shaped with an ornate red frame with weird carvings that looked like symbols and a large crack running down the center. No one fixed the shattered pieces and none of the family dared go up the attic, until Maggie, the teenage girl, was forced to sort out and clean the attic as punishment for staying out past curfew. She decided to throw the broken stuff and sell the ones that are still useful. She found the mirror and wiped away the dust, and the mirror gleamed in the dim light. Maggie gasped at her reflection. It was as if she was looking at a different version of herself, but the more she stared at her face, the more her face became distorted and frightening, as if she was looking at a monster. She screamed and ran to her room. That night, Maggie had a vivid dream. She was trapped in a room, staring at the mirror in the attic. Her reflection was grinning, revealing razor-sharp teeth, and her eyes glowed with an eerie red light. Suddenly, the mirror shattered, and she woke up screaming. After that night, Maggie would not go out of her room, telling her parents she feels sick. Maggie's behavior changed. She became more withdrawn and aggressive. She developed hatred towards her parents for watching her every move. She also avoided her younger sister Sarah, whom she thought was telling lies about her to their parents. The parents became suspicious of Maggie but also considered that maybe it's because of teenage hormones. They would hear Maggie whisper in the night but could not hear the words properly. Whenever they asked Maggie who she was talking to, Maggie would appear like she did not hear anything. One cold afternoon, Maggie's little sister Sarah disappeared, and the family searched everywhere for her. They found her in the attic, staring into the mirror, her eyes glowing with eerie red light. As the parents tried to pull her away, the mirror shattered, and a dark, shadowy figure emerged from the broken glass. The figure swept towards them, and they all felt an icy chill run down their spines. The figure dissipated into thin air. They breathed a sigh of relief, believing that whatever was there in the mirror was finally gone. However, things only got worse from that point on. Strange occurrences began to happen in the house, and the family felt like they were being watched at all times. Maggie's little sister also started acting strangely, and she would often talk to someone who was not there. The family realized that the shadowy figure did not disappear, it had merely taken on a new form, one that was even more terrifying than before. It had taken up residence in their home, and it would not leave them alone. As days turned into weeks, the family's fear and paranoia grew. They tried everything to rid themselves of the shadow, but nothing worked. Eventually, the family was forced to abandon their home, leaving everything behind. The house stood eerily silent and dark, until a year later, when the Smith family decided to sell the cursed house. They returned to the house to do repairs and salvage items before they put it in the market for sale. They were determined to fix the house to increase the selling price and ignore whatever strange things that might come their way. As soon as they entered the house, the strange eerie feelings they felt returned. The shadow, as if it had been waiting, was stronger than ever before. With determination, the family decided to stay, one last time. Maggie, now a little older, noticed red wild rose bushes that had grown in the garden. She went out and picked up the most beautiful rose, but her hand was cut by the thorns. She looked at the droplets of blood that came out of the wound. The wind blew and she noticed a shadow move in the attic from outside, but instead of feeling frightened, she thought maybe the shadow was harmless and misunderstood, or maybe it was watching over her. Maggie ran back to the house and opened the door to the attic that with the newfound feelings of curiosity. She felt the familiar shadow's presence as she slowly picked up the pieces of the mirror and put them back together. She would hear the strange noises coming from the walls, but she was no longer afraid. She cleaned the attic and made it her second bedroom while the repairs were ongoing downstairs. Every night in the attic, Maggie would try to communicate with the shadow by using a spirit board or talking board, a flat board marked with the letters of the Latin alphabet. The messages created were sweet and sexually suggestive. Soon the shadow would take on a new form, appearing to Maggie as a dark, seductive figure that whispered sweet nothings into her ear. The shadow told Maggie he's a prince from another world and promised her freedom from her parents. The shadow also told her parents kept a dark secret from her, and was performing forbidden ritual behind her back, in the hopes to increase their wealth, that resulted to the shadow being trapped in the house. Maggie became very suspicious of her parents, especially when her parents argue so much about money, as if nothing else mattered in the world. She would secretly listen to their conversations. One time, she overheard her parents talking about her, how out of control she had become, and how they will convince Maggie to see a psychiatrist. Maggie was so upset with what her parents were up to. Alone in her room on a windy night, the shadow told Maggie that her parents are trying to separate them by selling the house. With sweet words and promises of happiness, Maggie thought of a solution on how to stop her parents from selling the house. On the last day of cleanup and repair of their house, everyone was exhausted. Maggie moved through the dark house stealthily, making her way to each of her family members' rooms. First, she found her mother in the kitchen, washing dishes. Maggie snuck up behind her and plunged the mirror's shattered pieces into her mother's back. Her mother fell to the floor, gasping for air, and Maggie watched as the light faded from her eyes. Next, Maggie made her way to her father's room, where he was sleeping peacefully in his bed. She raised the mirror's pieces and brought them down on her father, again and again, until he stopped moving. Finally, Maggie entered her younger sister Sarah's room. Sarah was awake, staring at her with wide, terrified eyes. Maggie pushed Sarah and pinned her sister to the ground. Sarah fought with all her might, but it was not enough to stop her older sister, who was taller and bigger than her. Maggie brought the mirror's pieces down on her sister's neck and chest area, until Sarah drew her last breath. Maggie stood in the silent house, surrounded by the bodies of her family. She felt relieved and was whispering as she strolled around the house in circles for hours. When the sun rose, she was still walking around the house, holding a broken pointy mirror, with blood all over her. The children who would pass by running were so horrified at the sight of Maggie that they ran their fastest and screamed in terror. They told their parents what they saw, and police were called. The authorities arrived in the house and saw the horrific scene. 3 members of the family were dead. Each of them had shattered glasses plunged into their flesh, and weird symbols were written in blood next to the bodies. Maggie was taken to the police station for questioning, but she just stared blankly at the detectives. She was sent to a mental home, where the doctors and nurses were frightened of her. Maggie's mental state continued to deteriorate, and she was found dead at the mental hospital for some unknown reason. When the staff cleaned up her room, one of the cleaners, a lady, found a small mirror with cracks in Maggie's drawer. She looked at the mirror to put on a lip balm, but her reflection looked like a monster that looked like her. She was horrified and dropped the mirror. Staring at the shattered pieces, she heard a faint whisper, and a strange shadow moved across the walls. Frightened, she exited the room to ask for help, but all she got from her colleagues were whispers and strange looks.